welcome to Crossing Darkness, a podcast about the role playing games set in the world of darkness and other tabletop games. We are broadcasting over Twitch every Sunday, 7 p.m. Central Time, and are open to chatting with the fans during the show. This is Season 3, Episode 2, Vampire the Masquerade. I'm your host, Frozen Fallout, and my co-host is Motor Rory, who helped me create this podcast, as well as a 40-person, four-table Gen Con event that we ran, featuring Mage the Ascension, Werewolf the Apocalypse, Hunter the Reckoning, and Vampire the Masquerade. How you doing this week, Motor Rory?
Pretty good. Just this is the end of our Christmas vacation here during the times of COVID. So, like many people, I stayed at home, which was quite nice.
Nice, yeah. I didn't do much at all either this holiday. Kind of stayed in and watched some movies and shows and stuff, and kind of relaxed.
Yeah. Did your family get together?
Yep, there was a family get together.
Are they all gonna die?
I don't think so. Hope not.
Yeah, nobody in my family traveled. It was I liked it.
Yeah, it's always nice. So yeah, so this week we're going to be talking about Vampire the Masquerade. So I guess the first main question is what is Vampire the Masquerade? Um, so this was a game line that was made in the early '90s by White Wolf. It's one of their main debut uh, game lines, and if you've listened to our podcast before, you probably have heard us talk definitely about Vampire the Masquerade. But some people like Mike has heard about it, has talked about it quite a bit. But you would say that you're not really an expert. Is that correct?
Not even close. Yeah. I've never played Vampire except in, I think, a couple of the LARPs that we did at your house, actually. Um, and I'm vaguely familiar with it, obviously, having read as much as I have about World of Darkness. Um, Probably know more about the Cain mythos than I do about the clans. Um,
So
and so, actually, and that's actually one thing that I wanted to bring up is one of the memories that I have of when we started planning for Madison Under Siege. There was a time when I was over at your house, your apartment, and you literally went through all the clans with me because I had never actually read anything on Vampire, and I think that's what we're going to do right now. We're just going
yeah,
to go through the clans, right?
yeah.
Before we do that, what's what's your general explanation as to what a vampire player does during a game? Just
Well,
to
I think
kind of
that
put the clans in context.
Yeah, so I think that the general game line itself. And actually, I was going to ask you this: what is your from somebody that's kind of wouldn't say that they're an expert, but has kind of seen World of Darkness and played a lot of World of Darkness, but hasn't done a lot of Vampire. Really, what's your point of view on Vampire? Like, what's your take on it? Like a quick little.
Yeah. Um, so like anything else, it's about stories of people struggling against other individuals and forces. But in this context, it's usually you've either recently become a vampire or you create the backstory of a vampire that's existed. Uh, and in general, it's avoiding fire and the sun. It's feeding. So there's some storytelling around that. Uh, and then after that, it's negotiating navigating the internal politics of the vampire world. Uh, and then on top of that, maintaining the masquerade seems to be a main part of the game. So keeping your activities secret while struggling to be on top. Uh, and what's the idea? It's vampires just want to survive. And so most of the political machinations inside the vampire world are all about making it easier for your character to survive by gaining allies, resources, safe spaces, um, servants.
Right. It's about being part of the
Yeah.
whole Camarilla and everything. You know, the reason for the masquerade. I would say alongside with the drive for survival is there is to a certain degree a drive for power and control to a certain degree, and which kind of goes back to survival. The more power you have, the more control you have, the more likely that you're able to survive. You know, hundreds and hundreds of years. You know, when you're not just thinking about things in a 50-year time span or a 100-year time span for what we have in our lifetimes. You know, these creatures have to exist and think about existing for hundreds and possibly thousands, you know, and beyond years, you know, to their hope it forever. And so yeah, definitely. I think that kind of sums up Vampire the Masquerade, though, very well. Is that it is a very political, it's a very role play centric game. There are a lot of mechanics to the game itself, but the mechanics I find to be extremely simple. It's not until you get into like disciplines and the powers of each of the different vampires and what kind of different things you're able to do, um, that you can get into some kind of complications. But unlike Mage the Ascension and a lot of the other games, um, even Werewolf kind of gets a little bit uh, complicated with the way that they have their powers. Vampire is really straightforward, really simplistic, and pretty easy to know a lot of the powers offhand and kind of memorize them pretty quickly, especially things like fortitude, celerity, potence. These are your main three physical disciplines because it's 1 point in potence gives you the ability to that's some of the interesting things. They've kind of changed it up over the years, and I believe now it gives you extra dice and not just automatic successes. um,
Now you're talking about V5.
yeah, V5 and even the 20th anniversary edition. But then you've got like Fortitude that just gives you extra soak dice against aggravated and all other kind of things. Celerity gives you extra actions, and these things are pretty simplistic once you've got down exactly what system you're going to be using. Which I'm very third edition with Vampire the Masquerade with maybe a little bit of mix of Dark Ages. Um, because I just do I know potence as being one extra dot of automatic success on any kind of strength check. Fortitude is can just soak aggravated and other damage and this extra soak dice, and then the celerity gives you extra actions. However, I prefer the Dark Ages version of celerity, which forces you to spend a blood point for every action you're taking instead of just one blood point in order to do uh, all of your celerity. So if you have 5 in celerity in third edition, you could take 5 actions by spending one blood point, which
Yeah.
was is pretty crazy when you're talking about multiple turns in a combat, and somebody getting in 3 turns they get 15. It's pretty nice. It's just,
Yeah, I know it gets pretty complicated in Vampire.
but yeah, the simplicity of it though is the beautiful part because it allows you to focus on storytelling for the most part. It lends very very strongly into LARP, and is helped bolster the LARPing community. Um, and is something that um, has really lended itself to a story-driven role-playing game rather than a mechanical combat-oriented role-playing game like Dungeons and Dragons is more mechanics and having a map. And I always found it really interesting because when I got into Dungeons and Dragons, I had come from Vampire the Masquerade actually, and the first game that I had played was Dungeons and Dragons, but we'd went over and played Vampire the Masquerade immediately after that, and it was still set in this kind of concept like he was playing Vampire the Masquerade to a certain degree. For example, we didn't have a Chessex map or a board or anything for you to kind of see where your characters were when we were playing the Dungeons and Dragons game. And when I played Dungeons and Dragons and Vampire the Masquerade for a long time, I never used a map. We just imagined where
Right.
our characters would be. Um, and Dungeons and Dragons lends itself very strongly to the concept that you should absolutely have a map on the board to show you exactly where you are so you can do exactly the things that need to be done. But Vampire the Masquerade a- absolutely has no concept of having a map for you to, a tile-based map system for you to move on.
Yeah. There are actually a lot of role playing games that have basically said like it's probably not a good idea to use a map in combat situations, just because there aren't really solid rules for uh, movement in combat and flanking and all that. I mean, D&D, the combat rules are basically a mini game, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a big part of the game. It's the way you progress, and every setting that D&D has is the adventurer style going into places and fighting things, whereas World of Darkness is very much not that. It's at least as far as
It's going to places and
I've played
talking
it.
to people, and I have played some very combat heavy and hack and slash power gaming with Vampire the Masquerade that like lend itself very strongly to the power great gaming of Dungeons and Dragons, but it was on a more epic kind of, you didn't get into the nitty gritty of combat. You well, you did get into the nitty gritty of combat, but I have to say that Vampire actually, as much as you would think that the system that it has would lend itself then to really easy combat, smooth combat, and it actually has a very there's a lot of roles. We talked about this with Rick Hines on our last podcast, but there's a lot of roles that go into just achieving one concept of how much damage is done to somebody in a turn. You got to roll to hit, you have to roll to dodge, you have to roll for damage, and you have to resolve all these things in a weird way because you start off by saying whoever lost initiative declares what they are doing first, and then you go all the
Yeah,
way
if you're
up.
doing it the right way.
Yep, and so you go all the way up to the and it makes sense. It's an interesting concept because you get to hear what everybody is doing and decide on what you want to do based on that information. And then you go back through, and the person that wins initiative gets to declare last and then gets to do their action first. And then you go back down through and you can change your action from being like I was going to shoot this guy but somebody's going to shoot me now so I'm going to dodge, so it gets extremely complicated for what
Well,
could be extremely simple when you have such a
it gets relatively complicated compared to some other systems, but I'm sure everybody's had this kind of uh, anybody who's played a decent amount of role playing games, especially ones with lots of combat. Uh, at some point in your experience, you're going to say to yourself, "That's not very realistic." All you would need to do is add this mechanic to make it more realistic. But then you realize there are tons of systems out there that people have come up with for combat in RPGs that are more realistic, and there's a reason we don't use them. I've been watching a lot of actual play D&D, and the way that 5e is currently set up is pretty good. I think the only deficiency that it has is uh, there's no provision for um, cooperative action as much as there should be. And I'm sure D&D podcasters could debate the shit out of that for hours. Um, but we're talking about vampire. So, do you want to get into the clans or do you want to talk about vampire combat?
Let's talk about the clans here, yeah, because vampire combat is pretty much similar to the rest of the World of Darkness combat in general, and we've kind of covered that a few times. Um, So I think in general, though, one of the things that kind of lends itself to an interesting thing for Vampire the Masquerade is that you're born into a clan. So somebody sires you. You've lived a normal human life, and a vampire at some point in time decided, I'm going to turn this person into a vampire. And one of the first things you do in character creation, is you decide what kind of human you are. And then once you've decided what human you are, you decide what clan would best suit me. What is the clans that would want to recruit this human? Because if you're like a country bumpkin kind of person that has no formal education, has no nobility in their blood, has no drive to be a successful person and just kind of wants to be, the farmhand for the rest of their life, the likelihood of you being recruited by a Ventru, which is the hierarchy, the nobles, the princes, which is their term for the leaders. It's interesting. I always found it interesting that they never wanted to be kings. They're just princes, you know. There's
I'm
no.
sure it's somewhere in the lore as to why it's done like that.
I never think in all my years I've never found
It's
a solid thing that makes me
I mean,
understand why they would do that.
if I had to speculate, it's because Cain is king or Enoch is king, and you can never be king because they are like the eternal king.
It's yeah. I'm not 100%
But I don't know.
sure on that. I mean, Cain was not really around during a lot of the times when people started calling themselves princes. I think it was more of the third generation. But yeah, basically there was always somebody bigger than you. Um, for the princes were definitely not the kings of the land for sure. Um, but that lends itself to kind of interesting kind of thing. So you have to kind of look at these different kind of groups that exist within um, the World of Darkness and Vampire the Masquerade, and each one of them has their own intricacies and they have weaknesses and they have different kind of powers. Is very unique to each one. Some of them cross over here and there, but each one has its own, at the very least, its own mastery of over a discipline. Um, and basically, if you are this country bumpkin person, though, you could get recruited still as being. It's like, well, okay, so then I can't be a vampire because I mean, who would want to, embrace some kind of country bumpkin guy that just wants to be a farmhand for the rest of their life? Well, there's the gangrel, animal loving, untamed, bestial kind of vampires that hang out in the woods more than anything and interact with or fight with werewolves quite a bit, might have a very big interest in you for whatever reason, whether it's a love interest, whether it just is, they're looking for companionship and they feel like you would be suited to that. Um, there's a lot of reasons why somebody would turn somebody into a vampire, but a lot of it kind of does come back to loneliness and wanting to become a father or a parental figure basically over somebody. The one thing
Yeah,
I always
and sometimes it goes back to that. in order to survive longer, sometimes you need people that are in your thrall, and a childer, which is what you call it when you sire someone, uh, is could be that person
Right.
or vampire.
Right. Absolutely.
Anyway, should we just go through the clans real quick so we can get to the debate?
Yep. So the main clans that you have here are the so there's I'm just going to kind of go through the clans here, and then I'm going to kind of talk about the different factions that there are, which comprises of these clans. So we've got the Assamites are the basically they're an independent group. They're the silent masters of assassin and are very um, I don't know how to say it, but it basically like they're very niche. They're very assassin oriented kind of group. They're Middle Eastern, and they did expand upon them throughout the years, um, but I never really got too deep into a lot of the Assamite lore, to be honest. But there is quite a bit of Assamite lore out there that gets much deeper than them being just your assassins, and they do a lot with blood magic as well. So they're one of the groups that has thaumaturgy at their access, which is a power that basically gets you to the level of mages and being able to do almost anything with your powers. Um, the next clan is the Bruja, which are your kind of philosopher kings, as well as, well, they used to be the philosopher kings. They're now more rebels and rogues. They're very passion driven. These are your motorcycle gang. Um, you know, I could see the mafia to a certain degree um, being a big part of these groups, but a lot of the criminal organizations and stuff like that, but still have um, a lot of rebel uh, concepts that kind of go behind them. So I kind of see the mafia as more of the, during the prohibition and stuff, I would see that the Bruja would have been deeply involved in the running of alcohol throughout all of the United States.
I would have thought the Nosferatu, but yeah, Bruja. I always remember that because of the word bruiser. It's like Bruja are the tanks, the fighters.
Yep.
Uh, they're potents, right?
Yep, fisticuffed, melee. They're really people that you don't want to get within their reach usually. I
Yeah,
mean, each individual is an individual, but in general, the Bruja clan is well known for their ability to punch your face in.
yeah. I think if I remember correctly, it's there's always the person in the group who's like, okay, I don't want to really have to think too hard while I'm gaming, so I just want to be the dumb guy who punches things. And I'm pretty sure Bruja is who you take in that case.
Hmm. And then there's Clan Gangrel, which are your more bestial, and we talked about them a little bit before. They're more out in the woods. They there are some city gangrel to a certain degree, but they're very much inside of parks and stuff like that. They're not going to be hanging out um, usually inside of a city unless there's some kind of nature area or animal um, that I could see them hang. The Nosferatu are well known for being in the sewers, but the Gangrel I could see being hanging out in the sewers as well. Um, Although I would say
Yeah,
that. Mhm.
if I remember correctly, their gangrel are possibly aquatic vampires in certain cases.
Yes. Yep. There's so we kind of haven't talked about the curses, and I should actually probably bring that back or reel it back real quick. So the Assamite, their curse, they had two curses that happened to them. One was bestowed on them by Cain, supposedly, and that was the curse of diablerie. Basically, like once they start trying to like once they drink the blood of a vampire, they are like consumed with the idea of diablerizing the person. Later on, that was changed to by the Tremere used a huge thaumaturgical blood ritual to basically make it so that they can't diablerize anymore. Um,
And what is diablerie?
so diablerie is basically the taking the soul of of another vampire, specifically another vampire, and standardly it's seen as being somebody of a lower generation than you, but there's a lot of arguments of whether you could do it to somebody of a higher generation. It just wouldn't benefit you in the way, but it's the
Oh,
mechanic way
when
of
you
lowering
when you
your
say lower
generation.
generation, when you say lower generation, you mean a more powerful vampire.
Right. So the
Yeah.
first generation is Cain, and then you have second generation, which is like Enoch and two others, and then you've got the 13 clans, which are what we're talking about here. They're the third
Yeah.
generation that created each one of these clans, and you go, back from there all the way to where we are here, to where we're at about in the 19th or in 1990s. There's between you know you're at about 15th generation is about the farthest that you're able to go all the way down, and it seems to get really thin. Your blood gets thin, and you're not able to access all of the powers that all of the other vampires are able to. But most people play within the 8th generation to 13th generation, which gives you access to the majority of the powers, and anything lower than that gets you start becoming more inhuman. Um, well, I guess not just inhuman, but more fantastical in your powers, I guess. And this is the
Yeah.
mechanic that allows you to say if you start at 13th generation and you want to become a 6th generation vampire, you can diablerize your way down to a 6th generation vampire. And it's the only way to do that. There's no other way of powering yourself up, basically, in the game. And it's completely illegal by the Camarilla.
Yeah, I was gonna say like it's supposed to be this thing that is supposed to never happen. Diablerie. But my understanding of vampire games is it happens all the time.
Yeah, it seems to be one of those things that definitely happens a lot. Almost every game I've been, there's at least, somebody wanting to do Diablerie, if not committing it itself. Um, and it's
Yeah.
because it's the only mechanic to go down. So to bring yourself more power in a way that the game kind of has this locked system. Um, which I find that I always found that to be interesting. It's something that they changed up in like Requiem, where they made it so that you could spend experience points, and it's something that got more powerful. Your blood potency went up and basically gave you more power as you got older, and then as you slept, it got weaker, and you bounced back and forth on your blood potency. Whereas Vampire the Masquerade was a very this is all generational and has to do with consuming souls. And if you want to get more powerful, consuming souls is extremely dangerous. There's major characters that have been screwed over by Diablerie, according to the lore history of Vampire the Masquerade. So it's something that I feel like people that play Vampire the Masquerade and are obsessed with Diablerie, a lot of the people I've run into don't really understand the mechanics behind it, besides that it gets them lower generation, and that super excites them, and that's all that they really care about. And any consequences that they hear for that, they're like, there's got to be ways around those.
I mean, that's how it would work in the vampire society though. So,
Yeah, that's true. um, so the Bruja are very inclined to go into what is called a frenzy. Basically, every vampire has a beast inside of them that they have to quell. It makes them drink blood, and it makes them frenzy and kill things, and it also makes them run like a scared little pussycat. Um, so this beast inside of the Bruja is even more likely to come out, and it is, reflected in the mechanic that there's a frenzy roll that you make, and Bruja have a higher difficulty on trying to stop a frenzy from happening. And this brings us back to the Gangrel, which I always found was an interesting flaw for them, was that as every time they frenzy, they start becoming more animalistic. They might, start growing more fur. They might, more hair that becomes more furish. They might always have claws out if they have the protean ability for claws. Or if they don't, they just have claws that are not aggravated damage, but they have, their fingernails and stuff might become more clawish. They might, get canines instead of, the teeth that we have. Um, and it can, kind of bloom from there, where they kind of become more of a were-beast than they are. And they can be of any type. Doesn't need to be werewolf or wolf. It can be fish. It can be
Yeah, they can
lizards.
turn into a lot of stuff.
And from my understanding, you're not necessarily restricted to having just one animalistic type. That you could have like the fangs of a wolf, but have the webbings of a frog on your hands and stuff like that. That might make you a
Yeah,
little
and
bit
that's
more.
that's from the protean power.
No, that would be just from frenzying in general.
No, the animal stuff.
No, the animal stuff is from frenzying in general. It's their flaw. So
But
every
can't you use the protean power to change your features into animal stuff?
not so broadly. It's very specific. You can turn yourself into an animal. There's some deviations, but you can't just turn like a part of yourself into an animal or something like that. Um,
Oh, okay.
but you can become. Usually, you pick two animals: a flight animal or a water animal and a land animal. Possibly a water and an air animal, but a lot of people play on land, so you'd pick a land character. But yeah, as you power up, you do have the ability to grow claws. So the powers are basically for Protean. You have red eyes, which allow you to see in the dark. You have claws at level 2 that allow you to do aggravated damage with your um, claws. At level 3, you're able to turn into a wolf or a bat, is the base for it, but you can kind of change those up. Um, Level 4 is you're able, and I might be switching these up, but it's either you're able to go into the ground or it's the mist one. So you're able to turn into mist, or you're able to seep into the ground. And then level 5, I think level 5 is the ability to turn into mist, and the level 4 is the ability to seep into the earth, and just so you can be out in the middle of the woods and it's just about to be daytime and you just seep into the ground and you're safe.
Yeah, I would grab my vampire book if it was near me. I haven't gotten it on the shelf yet.
um, but yeah, so the next one on our list is the Cappadocian, as otherwise known as the Clan Giovanni, and these are your necromancers. And they're the main one that people will be playing would be the Giovanni, which would be um, these are these are very Italian mafia, but very necromancy, necrophilia, crazy incestual family stuff. It's a clan that's one big family more than it is a clan of vampires of all different, you know, walks of life and stuff like that. Like different, it really is heretical in Clan Giovanni. Um, and their flaw is that they hurt people when they give them the kiss. When they draw blood from them, otherwise known as the kiss, it actually hurts the person drawing from them. Normally, the kiss would give you the most intense orgasm you've ever had in your entire life. they give you the most excruciating pain that you've ever experienced in your entire life from being drawn from them. Which also makes it so that it's easier for them to find, either kill the person that they're drawing blood from and cover it up, or for them to, have somebody that trusts them and will allow them to do this either through use of powers or other things. Um, but yeah, you're not going to be able to go into a nightclub and just start sucking off of some chick.
Yeah, which it might explain why uh, it's family, right? Because they probably feed off of their own family with the um, the promise of in the future becoming a vampire, and so the
Right.
pain is worth it.
And so the next one that we have is the Lasombra, which are your nobles of the Sabbat, basically. They're very much like the Ventru, which we'll get into in a little bit here. Um, and but they're very religious oriented, and they also have this obsession with the abyss. Um, and they control the enemy faction to the Camarilla, basically the Sabbat, that are basically they don't believe in the Masquerade as much as they believe that they should be ruling over humans, rather than hiding from them. However, they enact their own level of Masquerade for, as everybody, as we talked about since the beginning of this, it's all about survival. So they know not to piss off. It's not like they're just coming out and being like, vampires are real, we're here to conquer you. They're trying to do their own way of controlling the thing, but they don't believe in the rules of the Masquerade, and have broken from, and never were part of the Camarilla.
Yeah, they're basically like the Ventru, but they just don't care about the masquerade as much.
And they are extremely. I mean, the very, from the outside, I would say they're very Ventru-like. Once you get inside of them, they're extremely different from the Ventru because of their abyss and religious connections that they have. Um, the next clan, which I always found to be a really interesting one, was the Clan of Madness, which is the Malkavians. And I always found their antediluvian story to be really interesting because it's possible that he becomes the Madness Network, and it's one of the concepts behind what happens to their antediluvian is that he just becomes madness inside of all Malkavians and allows them to communicate with each other.
Yeah, the so-called milk time.
Yep. But the main thing about the Malkavians is they're all insane. Other than that, you can go anywhere with them. The Malkavians kind of can represent anything and everything, and can come from all different walks of life. But the main thing is that they're insane. Um, but if you if you have my point of view on the world, I would say that a good chunk of people are pretty insane anyways, so it's not hard for Melkavian to find anybody in any walk of life to become a Melkavian. Um, the next one is the followers of Set, which I always found to be very I like to use them as the bad guys in my games, because they are the corruption, the the followers of this corruption god and this belief that God is going to come back one day and rule. They also believe like he's a second generation and not a third generation. Um, you know, there's all this other kind of like, but they're an Egyptian focused um, clan basically, with a lot of corruption and death culty kind of stuff going on.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Did I
Oh,
lose you
yeah,
there?
sorry, my phone did a thing. No, um, But yeah, let's just get through the rest of them.
Yep. So then we've got Clan Nosferatu, which are the hideous information gatherers that live in the sewers. Um, the Clan Ravenos, which I always found to be interesting in the sense that they did a horrible job of making them. It's they're stereotyped as being the um, gypsies, basically.
Oh yeah,
Um, and they kind of killed them off in third edition. There's only like 100 or something like that left after third edition because uh, that antediluvian rose and kicks off like the beginning of the end of the world with rising and getting destroyed by the Tremere, Quasian, um, Kindred of the East, and um, other vampires and other things. It's just like this huge, event that kind of happens. And after he dies, or just before he dies, he curses his clan to make all of his clan try and attack each other and kill each other. And it works for the most part. Um, and then he
is that
dies.
his? What is their weakness?
Their weakness. What was their weakness? I want to say it's something like they have to steal or do something.
Okay, that's a little racist.
Yeah, it's something pretty bad. Weakness, classic. The Ravenos clan are all criminals. Each Ravenos has a specific vice ranging from mass murder to, uh, just stabbing somebody. Or, just robbing people, stuff like that. Yeah, it's pretty bad.
Looks like 20th anniversary tried to back away from that.
Yeah, they tried fixing stereotyped. Their compulsion can range from beneficial ones, like benefiting innocents or donating to the poor. So they don't have to be criminals.
Yeah, it's
And
just
then
they're
fifth edition
compelled to
changed
do things.
changed it up completely. It looks like they get doomed.
Yeah,
Um, and all right, so let's see here. Um, The next is the Toreador clan, which is the artsy fartsy kind of group that's their flaws. They get mesmerized by things. It's always the running joke that the Toreador is the one that's just going to be standing out in the middle, watching the sunrise come up and burning her alive because it's so beautiful. Um,
yeah. I think Toreador was, my favorite of all of them, just because I get the impression that like a lot of art is created because Toreadors just need something to do, and so they fund a lot of things. So,
Yeah, I
so
can
it was
see
part
them
of
as
the
like a beneficial to society vampire group, actually. I mean, although
yeah.
there's a lot of crazy ones. So.
Yeah, I had an unnamed Toreador tied to one of my hunter characters because she was a dancer.
Oh yeah, yep. Um, and so moving on, we've got the Tremere, which are the sorcerer vampires that come from Mage the Ascension. Actually, they are House Tremere, a group of mages who foresaw the weakening of magic in the world and the coming of the um, technocracy, controlling the paradigm basically, and they wanted to find a way to make themselves immortal. So they created a serum out of vampires' bloods that they got from the Gangrel and the Zemisi, I believe. And they said, hey, this is going to make you all immortal. It'll give you all the powers of a vampire, and you're going to stay a mage. We're going to do this ritual, and this is going to make us all powerful beings, basically, a new thing, a combination of the vampire and mage, and it turned them all into vampires because they couldn't do it for real, and they tricked all of their members into doing this, from my understanding. But once they were vampires, and they were like, okay, well, what do we do now? And the leader, Tremere, had this great idea. Why don't I just go Diablerize a third generation? And then I'll become a third generation. So he goes and Diablerizes third generation. And for the next like 1,000 years, he fights a battle of the souls with this thing. And according to most lore, he fails. It's possible he might have won, or he might have tricked, or he might have got out a long time ago. Um, some of the things I heard was that he, like, as soon as he Diablerized, almost the moment that he Diablerized, he left that body. Like, he either got kicked out immediately, or he just was like, "Oh fuck, what did I do?" and just jumped out and jumped into what eventually became the leader of um, the anti-Tribu Tremere, who joined the Sabbat, and were trying to join, you know, trying to fight the Tremere that they created, basically.
Yeah.
um, and the next one is Clan Zamisi, and Clan Zamisi is more of your Russian old world kind of vampires. They hold to a lot of the Transylvania kind of vampire that we're used to. Although Nosferatu also, represents the Nosferatu that we've heard in the
Yeah.
past. But Zamisi have an interesting weakness. They always have to keep a bit of dirt from their homeland around,
Oh, that's them. Okay.
and they're the flesh crafters, and also the other leaders of the Sabbat. They're well known for making monstrous creatures and having crazy laboratories. And then last, but of course not least, the Clan Ventru, leaders of the Camarilla, normally seen as what would be the prince of a generic city of vampires, would be run by the Ventru. They're also known for being really good warriors as well. They have fortitude, they have dominate, and they have presence. So they're known for being like not just they're not necessarily single man combat people, although they can be absolutely. But they're really well known for being able to rally an army or rally a group to fight and kick ass
Yeah.
for them and to participate with them in the combat. So that gets us through
Oh wait.
the
What are
13
what are,
major clans.
what's the Ventru weakness? Because that's a cool
Oh,
one.
the Ventrue weakness is the weird one, which is they have a specific type of person that they can draw blood from, and that's it. If they, let's say that they're a vampire that will only take blood from virgins. If they're given any other blood, even if they're on their deathbed and they need that blood, that doesn't matter. They're not going to take it.
Yeah, I always thought that was a cool weakness because restricting your feeding pool is very story driven.
It's very story driven, and I always found it interesting that either I found people do two things with it. One is try and make it a feeding restriction that is not that much of a feeding restriction. So instead of like
Yeah.
bringing your pool from 100% of people that you can drink blood from down to 5%, you make it so that it's, easily just, okay, I can only feed off of women, or I can only feed off of men, which does cut the population in half for you. But it's very different than somebody who says I can only drink from virgins. But you can have that spectrum.
Yeah. And I've always thought that like you could kind of take care of that by saying like, hey, the more that your feeding options are restricted. Like there's some sort of mechanical offset that you get to make it worth taking that in character creation. Um, I don't know what that would be. I'm looking at their weakness right now on the wiki page, and I don't see that as a thing. But anyway,
But yeah, so that's the 13 main clans. The main thing with Vampire the Masquerade is you've got the Camarilla and the Sabbat. The Camarilla comprises of 7 of those major clans: the Tremere, the Ventru, the Gangrel. Depending on your timeline, the Gangrel leave, and other things kind of happen. But up to third edition, you've got um, you know, the Tremere, the Ventru, the Gangrel, the Bruja, the Toreador, the Nosferatu, and the Malkavians. That comprises your Camarilla, and they're kind of this. We have the Masquerade. Oh, and also thank you so much, Jim, for following. That's awesome. Thank you. Um,
I didn't see that guy there.
but we also have the Sabbat, which is basically the La Sombra and the Zamisi, and then the anti-tribute, basically the Ventru who joined the Sabbat, the Nosferatu who joined the Sabbat, the all the
Oh, is that
different
what
other groups.
anti-tribute is?
Yes, anti-tribute is the I joined the Sabbat and I am no longer part of the um,
Okay. Yeah, I never knew that.
yeah. um, And then you've got the independent clans, like the Ravenos, the Giovanni, the Assamites. Um, these are. I'm missing one, aren't I? What's the last? I think there's 4 independents. Where am I missing this?
Uh, yeah, I don't know.
Giovanni, Assamite, Ravenos.
Samisi?
Oh,
No,
Followers of
that's
Set. Yeah, one of my
okay.
faves, actually. So yeah, I don't want to forget about those. Oh, awesome! Thank you for cheering for 100 bits. That's awesome. Thank you. Oh, thank you.
We both have radio voices. That's cool.
Um, but yeah, so basically, that's our main kind of setup here for Vampire the Masquerade. Very role playing driven, very politics kind of driven, and it's kind of driven of the interactions between all these different groups and what they're doing in modern times and how you're initiated into it and kind of brought up. I personally like to play on a more um, the primogen level with my players. I like to have a much higher level power for my players to be playing with, rather than being brand new inductions into the world of darkness. But it all depends on your player's skill level that you have to work with. But I think even new players can definitely. Um, oh, awesome! Thank
Yeah,
you so
yeah.
much for subscribing. That's awesome, dude.
Kick ass.
Um, but yeah, so I think that the last thing that we were going to do here was talk about whether or not a starlight from another sun, another star, if you got close enough, would it affect a vampire? And I'm going to go straight off here and say no, absolutely not. It's a curse that's done by a supernatural being, and pretty much I'm going to hold to the kind of concept that really the world of darkness doesn't look outside of our solar system, and it's hard to even say what the other stars are. They would probably are big balls of light, like that we think, But it's the world's darkness. For all we know, they're all just pin cushions, pinholes in the tapestry around us.
That is what a mysterious mage from another dimension might say. Um, anyway, yeah. So this is actually a debate that we have had on and off for a long time, and I am on the side that yes, vampires on actually it doesn't need to be on a planet, but in the proximity of another star would be affected by it in the same way. Uh, but before I get to my reasoning behind it, let's speculate on how a vampire gets to that place. So obviously, it's on a technocratic spaceship or through the Technogate, and they get transported to another planet. Have you ever heard of anybody running a vampire game where that is the case, where a
Absolutely.
vampire gets to another?
Yep, I've done it
When you have?
myself. Yeah, I've done it myself a couple of times back in the early days, and I had it. One of my first like superpower game GMs that we had loved to do world hopping, and he actually took us through somewhat of the Wheel of Time series. He kind of had
Oh
this
no.
like collaboration of the World of Darkness and the Wheel of Time series, and kind of ripped us from Earth and brought us to another world where we could walk around in the sunlight. And
Oh, so that's probably where you get your idea from, is that you were playing a vampire and you were able to do it.
right, I would say I'm influenced by that, but I'm also saying that because I believe that the curse is um, I don't know. I mean,
Okay.
I
Well, let me go through some of my reasoning now. Um, so we've already established the idea that if as a technocrat, if I recreate using only forces, uh, like all of the same intensities of electromagnetic radiation, that does not count as sunlight, correct? For a vampire.
So, I mean, according to the how do you do that, you have to go to some extreme levels of magic to be able to produce sunlight out of nothingness. One of the easiest ways that they say to do it, of course, is correspondence like 5, and I think you still need forces or something like that of 5 or something ridiculous. Maybe even might be down to 4, but it's basically you can open a portal that goes from takes sunlight and shines it in from the sun. Um, but to replicate sunlight in all of its pure intensive purposes is an extremely high level, definitely level 5 in like prime forces, and I think you just really need prime and forces.
Now, see, here's where my argument jumps in. You would need spirit.
I would say to affect a vampire, I would agree with that.
Okay, so that ties into my argument. Now let me read my thing from here, because from the Book of Nod, uh, after Cain is cursed by God, he is visited by 4 angels. First by the archangel Michael, who says, hey, stop this shit, stop whining, just come back to God's light, and we'll let you be fine. And Cain is like, no, and he's like, well then, uh, you're flammable now. And then Raphael comes, and he's the one that actually curses him with the sunlight thing. And I'll read that passage real quick. Raphael cursed me, saying, then for as long as you walk this earth, you and your children will fear the dawn, and the sun's rays will seek to burn you like fire wherever you hide always. Hide now, for the sun rises to take its wrath on you. And then he hides and stuff, and then uh, Uriel comes and curses him with the only being able to drink blood. Uh, and then there's another one, but that doesn't matter. The point of it is, The sun's rays will seek to burn you like fire. So
Mm-hmm.
that's basically the idea that the sun, when it can see a vampire, says, "You are now going to burst into flame, and I'm going to destroy you." So that means that there is a spiritual element to sunlight in terms of vampires and why they're weak to it, right? Uh, so I'll just get to the rest of the reasoning. Helios is the Celestine of all stars. Therefore, whatever star you are near, Helios can see you. He will burn the fuck out of you if you're a vampire. Now,
Interesting.
I think where that breaks down is whether or not you consider Helios to be the Celestine of all stars. He might not be. He might only be the Celestine of our particular sun.
See, I always took him as being the celestial of our sun. But I could see that as being all stars. My question to you then is what's the distance that it stops burning vampires then? Because obviously there's a distance.
Uh, I would put it in orbital mechanics, right? Um, so just to test the idea, let's say I could get a vampire to Pluto. Can the sun burn him or her on Pluto? Even though it's the way they describe it is it's the sun is just a particularly bright star as seen from Pluto.
Well, so this is one of my things about it is that it's not necessary. I mean, I want to say that it's more supernatural than it is scientific. My reasoning for this is that um, obviously there's sunlight is hitting vampires almost all the time. It's just how much sunlight is hitting them. Anytime the moon is out or any kind of unless you're saying that it has to be only in the pitch of night, which is not normally how people play. Normally they play that you can still kind of be around sunlight. You can even see sunlight, but as long as you're not in the direct
Oh,
rays of sunlight, you're not affected by it. Um, and that's
yeah,
where
yeah. Line of sight is my reasoning.
Well, it's not even line of
Uh,
sight because if I have a
for like,
sunlight filling up my room here, and as long as it's the direct sunlight that I'm going to be affected by the stuff that you can see the light on the through the window amplifying down, that's going to hurt me. The just the light of the room being around, as long as I'm not directly in that sunlight, I'm fine.
yeah, it's direct sunlight. I'm
Or
agreeing
yeah,
with you on that.
line of sight from Helios's kind of point of view.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
and then the additional argument is the like if all stars are Helios, then why aren't they burned by starlight? Uh, and my response to that would be, I think you have to be within the sphere of influence of a star, which would be the orbital uh, space of a star.
So
So
you would
like
say Pluto would be
I would say if you were a vampire on Pluto and you walked outside, despite the fact that you would not be able to do that, even a vampire, uh, and you could see the sun, you would burst into flame.
or if the sun would see you, you would burst into
Well,
flames.
yeah, yeah. If the sun can see you, if Helios can see you, like it doesn't matter. The speed of light doesn't matter. The amount of energy that technocrats would say is hitting you doesn't matter. It's you are in the sphere of influence of that particular incarnate of Helios, and he bursts you into flames.
So my counter argument to, and I feel like you've laid down a good solid argument as to why what you believe to be true is true. My rebuttal is that the world of darkness is Earth centric with a Judeo-Christian um, strong concept of the universe surrounds Earth, and the universe is Earth. There is no really there's possibly not even other stars out there, depending on how you kind of look at
Oh yeah.
this whole thing. As far as the technocracy is concerned, as far as the game is concerned, they don't talk about extraterrestrial they talk about extraterrestrial, but they don't talk about extrasolar things. Like as soon as you get to the edge of our solar system, you're into the deepest of the dark umbra, and
Yeah.
really,
I mean,
according to like the mechanics, it kind of wraps it all the way back into itself, and you really never get out there. There is no out there. There's really only here.
yeah. And they try to do it a little bit, I want to say in the Void Engineer books, but that's probably the only one.
Hmm.
Um,
Void
but yeah, everything
Engineer,
else is
Son of Ether, I
our
think.
solar system.
But
Oh
yeah,
yeah, Sons of Ether might do it.
there's not a
Um,
lot of talk about, and besides what we believe to be just there's craziness and darkness and evil and other things out there. Now my reasoning is that if you would get outside of our basically, if you would go to another solar system, my belief structure in the world of darkness is that you would basically entering an entirely different universe that would be centric around whatever the hell is happening in that solar system. And vampires would then become subject to the rules and regulations that are dictated by that solar system's universe, basically. I would see each individual solar system as being individual universes rather than seeing them as part of all one universe that you know, is the world of darkness, basically. I see the world of darkness
yeah,
really encapsulates just our solar system.
yeah. Because I keep thinking like, if vampires could figure out like a way to get to another planet where they can now go out in the sunlight and live different lives, like if that was the case, first of all, would they want to? Which I'm not sure they would, because they would theoretically still have to feed on blood. Um, of course, if the curse of Helios is gone because Helios isn't there, then the curse of having to drink blood only might also be gone.
Right.
But
That would be
that also argues that all your fucking powers are gone then too. It's kind of like saying like, okay, yeah, you can go to another planet and look at the sunrise, but you're probably just going to turn into ash because like uh, you violate all the rules
right. You become
of
yeah.
this new place
You
that you
you
went to.
probably gain a bunch of paradox because you're what normally would be static and norm and accepted amongst the reality and paradox at that time. You walk into it and they're like, whoa, we don't accept vampires here, or maybe they do though. My one of the things I
Yeah,
imagine is that you go to another star and all of a sudden you just find out that really it's just another Earth, maybe a little bit different, maybe a little bit different construction of the solar system, but yeah, we just found another Earth, and you just keep on going to each
yeah.
one. But in any case,
See now, I just
I,
keep thinking about. I do want to talk about this real quick. Uh, that GM that brought you to the land of the Wheel of Time, right? Theoretically, that place could have existed in the Umbra
right,
as a representation of a thought space, as we've discussed exists before. Um, Now, could you see the sun there? Because is the sun that you see in an umbral realm a representation of Helios? Probably, but maybe in a different context so Helios doesn't burn you. That would be interesting. But also, could a vampire exist in an umbral realm like that? That's a question too.
yeah, and there's questions of whether even whether you can get into the penumbra because it's like there's I don't think there's darkness inside like this. It's not the concept of like night and day in the penumbra. It just is. It's I don't there's no night, there is no day, there is just the penumbra. So if you step out into it, you might just immediately burst into flames because you're not being hidden from Helios anymore. Um, But I think the main thing though that I kind of take away is that I kind of lean more towards what, if I'm going to truthfully be a storyteller and I would actually include something like that, I feel like I would actually lean a little bit more towards your way of thinking. And one of the main reasons, though, why I kind of, after talking about a lot of this, the one reason why I would jump ship over to your way of thinking is that it degrades the curse of Cain. Like the curse of being, like, the whole thing about Vampire the Masquerade is you are a fucking vampire. You can't go out into the sun. You can't. You have to drink blood. You you can't resist the urge to drink blood sometimes, and your beast takes over and you murder somebody. You are a monster. You have to play a monster in the modern times that's trying not to be a monster if you're playing the humanity path, basically.
Yeah.
And that
Although
and going to another
I
world
I would
negates that aspect of the game. But if you want to negate that aspect, that's the way to do it.
I would be interested to hear if anybody's done you know the an actual like vampire goes to another planet and could go out in the sun. Um, but that brings up the concept that if you could get to another planet and the rules were different, what if Golconda is a place and not a state of being?
Ooh, that's an interesting that's an interesting concept. I like that.
Where they're like, yeah, no, if you can achieve Golconda and like these spirits are just sitting up there and they look back every once in a while and they're like, oh man, did they misunderstand me? I I totally thought I totally thought I was clear when I said Golconda was a place you can go to. Oh man, they keep trying to like meditate and shit. Oh man,
All right,
but
I
yeah,
think uh, I think we've kind of covered quite a bit here. We'll probably do more episodes on Vampire the Masquerade that'll get deeper into specifics, but I think this is a good little general overview with some crazy philosophical talk at the end here. That actually I think I've come over to your side more in the end here, and
they always do
oh, well, I think we might have evidence of that so far. I think I've come
because I
over.
do my research. Look at all my books.
Yeah.
I love buying books.
All right. So, is there anything? If there's anything from the viewers, if you have any questions before we wrap it up here, or is there anything that you have left to talk about, Mike, that you want to get off your chest? Any any woe
No,
stories? No.
no, just I enjoy it more than anything the debates about how it would work. So
I guess
that
one
was
one of
fun.
my questions is, as a GM, specifically independent from, um, what we're kind of doing now. But if you kind of took like a campaign setting for the World of Darkness and you included vampires in them, would you prescribe to a more technocratic point of view on them, or would you prescribe to the more Book of Nod, Judeo-Christian origin story for them, or would you make them into some kind of like parasite or?
I would definitely go with the ideological. It's their curse is not a physical thing. It's not a virus or genetics or anything. It is all spirit based. That's how I would do it.
So you would do it more werewolf kind of point of view.
Yeah, because
Cool.
like you can't fight a virus, but you can go fight Helios. Be like, I don't want to be cursed anymore, jerk.
Stop it. So would you say though that so you wouldn't say like
Which
angels
actually,
came down and cursed him. You would say like Helios cursed him and that maybe Gaia
I would
cursed him
actually,
and
I would say that the angels in the story would most likely be incarni of Helios,
okay, yep.
and if Helios isn't uh, the Father above, which is the one, which is Yahweh. If Helios isn't that, he is at least allied with that entity. And so it's because what is the story? It's Abel burns animals, and God is like, "Fuck yeah!" And Cain burns some plants, and he's like, "Ugh, that stinks." And so the next time he asks for a sacrifice, he's like, "Bring me your best. Bring me the thing you love the most." Abel brings some more animals and burns them, and God's like, "Fuck yeah, that's really great." And then he's like, "Cain, you didn't bring anything." He's like, "Yeah, I did." And he kills his brother, and he's like, "This is the thing that I love the most." And then God's like, "You fucking misunderstood me, and you're cursed forever." And then he sends one of his an aspect of him down. And he's like, "Hey, you can come back. You just have to like say that God was right." And he's like, "No." And he does that four more times, and God keeps cursing him. It's
Right.
like it's all ideological, it's all philosophical. And then if you can keep it in those terms and then give those ideological and philosophical things physical forms that you can interact with, like yeah, do that. Don't go the technocratic route where like some guy is like, "Oh, vampires are just a virus."
And here's the cure.
And uh, and this is the spirit factor, and we measured it. It's like that's not fun storytelling unless it's in a movie. Movies can be fun like that.
Yeah, one shot. I could see a one shot World of Darkness game where you like flip vampire on its head and like completely disprove the entire uh you know Kane theory basically, and it's like no, like yeah, I mean,
Oh,
there's a bunch of origin vampires actually, but you're just this one strain, like in you're just a virus that we've tracked it all the way down, and you originated here, and this is what happened. It was a interaction with a worm spirit and a human, and
yeah. Actually, okay. So just wrapping it up with this one last question for you, because you're running the game, Technogate. Let's say, because we're technocrats. Let's say we find a vampire, maybe really high generation, so they're fucking weak, and he's like, "I don't want to be a vampire anymore." Could we use technocratic magic to extract his human DNA, clone a human body, create a human mind, like use mind magic to transfer the mind, and essentially like make a new version of that person that's not a vampire?
I would say you'd be able to do everything all the way up to the point of moving the soul.
Yeah, because it's
So
the soul, it's the spirit.
yeah, so there is going to be a connection, kind of like a fetter almost of your body being a fetter that you can't leave. You're almost like a wraith that's kind of stuck. So you could do all that. You could basically duplicate the person. You could even move it, maybe even move their mind, because you can. You might even be able to move the soul. And the reason why I say that, um, I mean it's mage. You can do anything. I'm going to say it's mage. You can do anything. But
Yeah.
one of the main things that kind of points to some of the stuff you might use is Auspex gives you the ability to do an out of body experience and as well as to inhabit somebody else's body. And if your body gets destroyed, that's okay. Like I mean, not okay. You've lost your body now, but your soul's not destroyed because your soul has left your body and allows you. So vampires have the ability to leave their body with their soul, and inhabit humans and stuff like that. So to abandon a lot of the curse, you could get away with. Now, whether there's repercussions for breaking the rules, whether Helios has other ways or, Yahweh or whatever the fuck is that's, cursed these things, is there other things that it can do now that you're not tied to your body is, some of the questions, or are you going to degrade slowly because you don't have that connection anymore? um, there's a lot of questions on that, but there's a lot of examples of people doing stuff like this actually, which is Cappadocia, or not Cappadocia, but um, Salubri when Tremere diablerized him. He took over Tremere's body. Now he didn't transfer from a human or from a vampire to a human. He transferred from a vampire to a vampire, but you still with Auspex you have the ability to jump into a human body. I don't know how long term that that is though. I feel like you lose a lot of your immortality at that point.
Yeah.
So awesome. Well, I think that's a good little wrap up here. So this is Frozen Fallout signing off.
I guess this is Moto Rory saying good night.
All right, have a good one, everyone, and hope to see you around.